People may know me for being a huge fan of quirky, weird girl heroines or even childhood friends, but another archetype that rounds up my top 3 favorites, though I'm not as vocal about it, is the Deredere heroine. At least in theory, I really love a good Deredere heroine, ones who openly show their affection either towards just their love interests, all their friends, or even humanity as a whole. Unfortunately, this archetype isn't that common and often ends up being a bit too shallow. However, in recent times, I've been able to experience some really good ones that show the best of the Deredere archetype in any Japanese media. In this video, I'm going to talk about my top 10 Deredere heroines from visual novels. At number 10, I have Eris from Ayaku no Yustia. This is a kinda unique case as she's a character who, compared to all the others on this list, is a lot more open, snarky, and jealous towards basically every character, even being kinda harsh towards her love interest at times. That said, it does help she lives in a rather cynical setting where she was almost dragged to becoming a brothel prostitute. But because the main protagonist, Kaim, saved her from becoming a prostitute before the story began, although with some complications, she shows her gratitude openly. Now she gets to be a female doctor, which is obviously a much more respected profession. Despite her cynical nature, she very much shows her Deredere side in her own way, going out of her way to visit Kaim's house regularly to cook and do laundry for him, even though she's not exactly the best at it. Due to her profession, she will admittedly just let her biases get in the way and uses her medical knowledge to prioritize treating Kaim whenever he gets injured in fights, which happens a lot. While I actually kind of like Eris and her route was interesting, I will admit that as far as Deredere characters go, she could be a little bit too bitchy towards other heroines, which, well, I guess maybe could be considered realistic for women who get possessive of their man. So I guess in a way she's a very unique, cynical take on the Deredere heroine, definitely not the ideal, but she's definitely still interesting to me and one of the more intriguing characters in Ayaku no Yustia. Number 9, I have Sylvie from Kinkoi Golden Love Reach. In Moege, Sylvie is probably one of the first characters people think of when they think of a well-known and liked Deredere character. It's not hard to see why. Her default personality shows how much she loves her friends, and she's even willing to ditch her European princess duties to hang out with them. In terms of being chill and likable, it's hard to beat Sylvie on this list. Specifically, she's the one I can think of that I'd most want to be friends with because she goes out of her way to hang out and openly show affection towards all her friends. But she does it in a chill, down-to-earth, relatable, friendly way, not in a forced, archetypical way. This openness also extends to her romance. While she is openly affectionate, it's not as significant for her as it is for other characters on this list. Honestly, the only reason she isn't ranked higher for me, despite being fairly likable, is that she's probably the least deep character on this list. To me, she's also just a bit too selfish. Regarding her princess duties, if she really doesn't want to be a princess, she should just leave her family or something, since she clearly doesn't want to fulfill those duties. And while I like her relationship with Ria and Oro, the fact that she just feels like a secondary love interest between Oro and Ria just doesn't sit right with me, especially considering how supportive she is otherwise. That said, there's no doubt that Sylvie is a very likable and consistent character, which is why she's on this list. At number 8, I have Tsubaki Miwa from Jisenjo no Mao, or the Devil on G-String. This placement and character might surprise some people because most people seem to only care about Haru Usami, the main heroine from Jisenjo, but I've always personally liked Tsubaki the most. Part of that is because she's a very affectionate Deredere character in a very cynical setting, and I thought the way the story took advantage of that was really interesting. I liked how, in the beginning of the common route, a lot of her screen time shows her obvious affection towards Kyosuke, even though he's secretly a bad boy. But I'd say the more interesting aspect of Tsubaki's character is her loyalty to her family. Even though her family has its struggles, they're poor, with a lot of kids, a mom who gets sick easily, and a dad who gets into trouble more often than he should. They also face a lot of external pressures like people trying to take over their land. Despite all this, Tsubaki selflessly keeps everything together, playing with the kids, helping family with chores, and keeping things running smoothly. Things get intense when Tsubaki starts to get targeted, specifically by the main villain, Mao. She has to work with Kyosuke and potentially deal with Mao's schemes. Tsubaki's chapter is the first real chapter of Jisen in my opinion, and seeing how she slowly gets broken down by Mao's torture, like kidnapping one of her brothers and forcing her to complete dangerous tasks to get him back, was really unfortunate for her. But admittedly, as a viewer, it's fascinating to watch. Seeing someone who's normally so affectionate, Deredere, and clearly a family-oriented woman at heart slowly get broken down to the point where she starts taking more selfish actions was really interesting development for her character. I just wish they'd taken that aspect of her a bit further. While I liked the romance part of her route, which showed her true internal strength, I was hoping they'd explore the selfish angle more in her plot-related route later in the story. Even so, her chapter is one of the most memorable in Jisen, and that alone puts Tsubaki on this list. At number 7, I have Mayu Shikibe from Riddle Joker. You'd think that for Ubisoft, a Moege developer specializing in creating well-crafted heroines tailored to specific archetypes, they actually rarely straight up do full-on Deredere heroines. Mayu from Riddle Joker, from what I've read of the translated titles, is essentially the closest to this archetype. On the surface, she seems like a typical older sister One-san personality, mature and always looking after her friends. However, I always saw this as a bit of a forced act. She expresses it through light teasing at best, but it's obvious she's just trying to show affection to others while secretly craving attention herself. It doesn't help that she keeps dropping little comments about her being older than the other heroines and how she's holding herself back in school, acting like she's too old, clearly fishing for compliments. But make no mistake, I still think she's a true Deredere at heart, especially once you get into her route. But even before her route starts, she does things like deliberately comforting the protagonist Satoru by pulling him into her bosom multiple times. That's way beyond what a typical One-san would do. She's super proactive about making Satoru feel comfortable, especially with the reveal that she's something of a forgotten childhood friend. But that part doesn't really matter, since Riddle Joker is more about the whole blending a magical setting with slice of life vibes. And of all the heroines in Riddle Joker, heck, maybe even all Ubisoft visual novels, Mayu is probably the most openly affectionate consistently towards the protagonist right from the start. For those who know my typical Ubisoft complaint, most Ubisoft heroines, even the eventual affectionate ones, eventually resort to jokes about teasing the protagonist, calling him a pervert even when he's innocent. But Mayu, she's one of the few I can think of that almost never does that. Instead, a lot of the humor from her comes from how needy and openly affectionate she is with Satoru, especially after they get close to getting together. This charm, combined with her real reason for sticking around the academy despite being able to graduate years ago, and her fun, slightly quirky science research personality, makes her one of the best Deredere heroines I've come across. At number 6, I have Sakura Matou from Fate Stay Night. Sakura represents a darker take on the Deredere type similar to Eris and Tsubaki mentioned earlier in the video. When you first see her in the common route of Fate Stay Night, she feels like an introverted, shy version of the Deredere type. She's incredibly affectionate towards Shiro, visiting his house almost every day to cook and perform other domestic tasks. She also displays obvious jealousy whenever Shiro interacts with new female housemates like Saber and Rin. Many Fate Stay Night fans I met over the years didn't care for Sakura nearly as much as the other two main heroines, often citing her slice-of-life cooking scenes as a waste of time. However, I always felt the opposite. I thought Sakura's slice-of-life scenes were fantastic, and even before her route, they showcased her potential to be the best romantic partner for Shiro in the series. When Sakura's route, Heaven's Feel, starts, this belief is more or less confirmed for me. I think Sakura is easily the best girl in the original Fate Stay Night, which is saying a lot because I also really like Rin and Saber. As mentioned earlier, Sakura has a darker take on the Deredere type. Much of what happens to her in the second part of Heaven's Feel stems from a mix of her secret, dark backstory, self-loathing, and the corruption she has unfortunately been tortured with. This leads to some unfortunate dark drama between Shiro and Sakura, which could be seen as diminishing her Deredere attitude. However, considering how things resolve in the good ending, I still think the story works out for her personality well. Overall, while Heaven's Feel and Sakura's route are certainly the darkest in the original Fate Stay Night visual novel, their emotional impact would not be as strong without Sakura's wholesome Deredere relationship with Shiro that starts off really early in the visual novel and carries on through the end of Heaven's Feel. Number 5, I have Sayori from Doki Doki Literature Club. Despite this being quite possibly the most mainstream popular visual novel ever, I don't feel like I talk about it as much as I should. While I definitely don't consider DDLC one of my favorite visual novels, it does have elements that make it worth reading. The biggest one to me, by far, is Sayori, who I think is easily the best girl. Even in the slow parts of the original DDLC, I genuinely enjoyed her goofy, energetic, childhood friend-like dialogue with the main character and her role as the heart of the literature club. She's clearly the club's mood maker, calming down fights between Yuri and Natsuki, who are almost naturally opposed to each other. Sure, Sayori has the makings of the typical clumsy, airheaded heroine, but what I always loved about her was how this character subverts expectations. Of all the subversions in DDLC, hers just felt the most authentic. Clearly, the writer Dan Salvato researched what someone with actual depression might think and feel, blending it with the typical Deredere Genki girl personality. In the original DDLC, it's a shame that her role is somewhat sidelined for the sake of a plot twist that leads to the horror aspects of the visual novel, which I'm more hit or miss on. Thankfully, the canonical alternate prequel backstory in DDLC plus side stories brings out even more of Sayori's best qualities. With the main character absent, she becomes the heart and Deredere core of the friendship group even more, essentially bringing everyone together. She's the most open with her love for her friends and acts as a catalyst for everyone to share their emotions. In the side stories, She's essentially the one that turned the literature club into a psychologist venting club in the best way possible. It's a shame that Sayori is apparently the least popular of the main 4 girls in DDLC because I always thought she was by far the most likable. Her bright, loving personality combined with a nuanced, well-crafted portrayal of fictional depression, especially with an anime art style, makes her stand out. While some may see her as the butt of hanging jokes, nicknames she gets like Cinnamon Bun are far more fitting to me for her as a Deredere character. This is why she's one of my personal favorite visual novel heroines, especially from a Western-made visual novel or EVN. At number 4, I have Asuka from the Aokana series. The last several entries in this video have been rather darker subversions of the Deredere archetype. They still embody it, but just have some kind of dark, deep past or something to make them more interesting. Asuka from Aokana, in a way, is the complete opposite. This girl lives and breathes Deredere friendliness towards everyone she meets, especially those who like the same sport as her, flying circus. Even in her very first match of the series, where she took on the legendary Satuin and somehow magically won Battle Shonen style, she showed nothing but excitement for the sport at the end of the match and even struck up a legitimate friendship, although maybe more of a friendly rivalry with Satowin. As the story progresses, Asuka pretty much turns into someone who is basically in love with flying circus and everything about it, to the point that even with some of the more immoral people in the series, she goes out of her way to make friends with them or at least try to way to have a flying circus match with them. This genuine enthusiasm and love for the sport is very infectious and makes Aokana a lot more fun than you'd expect from a visual novel that focuses purely on its fictional sport. However, Asuka's definitely no slouch at being dedicated towards her love interest, in this case, Masaya, her Kochi, aka the one who introduced her to the sport and basically breathed new light into her life. There's some light backstory in her route that suggests Asuka didn't really have much of a life before the story started, but given how willingly she shows love for the sport, her friends, and her love interest, I just can't imagine that to be the case. This girl is just super fun with an energetic love for competition and everyone around her that I can't help but be consistently entertained yet somehow wholesomized by Asuka. Sure, understandably, a lot of people compare her to being a Mary Sue shonen protagonist or the female version of a Goku from Dragon Ball. However, I consider that an absolute win. A female, a Deredere, tomboyish Goku in real life sounds like an ideal girlfriend to me. At number 3, I have Arietta Fine from Symphonic Rain. This is unfortunately one of the few entries on this list where I just have to tread lightly due to spoilers. As for much of the story, Arietta doesn't actually appear on screen because she starts the series as a long-distance girlfriend of the main character, Chris. She's always asking what he's doing in the town he's moved to while he's practicing his fortel, a fictional piano. However, in their letters to each other, she shows nothing but love and affection as an introverted but deeply loving girlfriend. The more you progress through the routes and learn more about her, especially when you face the possibility of breaking up with her for other routes, the more Arietta's qualities shine. This is particularly true in the final route. I'll leave it at that, but she makes a strong case for being the best fictional girlfriend I've ever seen. At number 2, I have Kogane from Amanatsu. Amanatsu is, at best, a pretty okay moege visual novel. It has its moments, but tries to blend goofiness like Making Lovers with a slow, wholesome vibe like a Toneworks game like Hoshiori Yume Mirai without consistently excelling at either. However, if there's one thing that's consistently great, it's one of the main 3 love interests, Kogane. She's the first main love interest introduced, and from the beginning of the story, she's openly affectionate with the protagonist both physically and verbally, due to them being both outsiders from the big city who moved to a small town. Every time the group hangs out, she makes a point to spark goofy conversations, playfully teasing the protagonist and showing genuine interest in what he does. This type of personality could easily become obnoxious if done wrong, but thankfully, Kogane is anything but. She easily has the best comedy and banter of all the main heroines, especially compared to the cringeworthy side male characters, which makes her stand out as the best love interest for the protagonist. Though it doesn't help that the other 2 main heroines feel super boring to me, which is saying something considering one of them is a quirky, thick girl who should be my type. Thankfully, Kogane, like the others on this list, isn't solely defined by her goofiness and overt affection for the protagonist. She has surprisingly interesting depth for a moege heroine. It's not the deepest thing ever, but it's a potentially relatable familial issue that many people could face today. While it doesn't have a super dramatic resolution, the way she and the protagonist resolve it together was super wholesome and made me love her as a character even more. If it weren't for the number 1 spot on this list, Kogane would likely take the top spot purely for making an energetic, openly loving heroine so likable, and she just barely misses the number 1 spot to... At number 1, I have Nikaidou from the Iritoridori no Sekai and Hikari visual novels. This is easily one of the biggest pleasant surprises I've had in visual novels in recent history, and the main reason this list even exists. In the original Iratoridori no Sekai, Ai was an intriguing character who served mostly as a plot device, particularly towards the end of the true route. She had some interesting traits, but it wasn't until the fan translation of Iratoridori no Hikari, aka the sequel, came out that Ai truly stood out to me. Her name, Ai, which means love in Japanese, is incredibly fitting to say the least. For context in Irohika, without getting into major spoilers, Ai is the younger sister of the main heroine Shinku, who is easily the most popular in the series. Due to certain circumstances, Ai has a route in Irohika that essentially serves as a flashback to the entire series. All the build-up around her in the original Iroseka is explained in a fascinating way. Ai is consistently bright and cheerful, and the best part is it never feels forced. This girl is possibly the most charmingly idealistic heroine I've seen in any media to date. She reminds me of characters like Akari from Aria or Nia from Tengen Toppa Gurren Lagann, who expresses their ideals with an innocent, naive charm. While Akari has a natural curiosity about the world and Nia wants to inspire Team Daiguren while learning about humanity, Ai goes even further in a deeply cynical world. In Ai's world, adults can abandon, abuse, or even dispose of children due to the potential for their wishes to be granted. While most characters accept this harsh reality, Ai is not okay with it. She engages in what I like to call self-imposed charity work, doing everything she can to help kids in need, whether it's giving them hope or helping them achieve their wishes, since only adults can have wishes granted in the world that she lives in. Ai's incredible, goofy yet wholesome way of how she helps these kids earns immense respect from me. I believe that even in a less cynical world, she'd still find ways to selflessly, yet maybe somewhat selfishly, help the less fortunate out. While Ai shows great affection for strangers in need, she still prioritizes her family and loved ones, particularly her twin sister Shinku. Her willingness to go to great lengths for Shinku is praiseworthy, and was a key part of her role in the original Iroseka, which continues in Irohika, both in her flashback route and the present. However, make no mistake, she still embodies the classic Deredere traits of being overly affectionate towards her love interest. This is where Ai gets even more interesting depth-wise. Without getting into spoilers, despite her incredibly selfless acts, Ai has what could be called selfish motivations driven by guilt and anxiety over past actions. This adds far more depth than I'd expect from an overly optimistic, selfless character. Even these motivations have intriguing layers, and I wish the story had explored them more. Unfortunately, Ai's route is the shortest in the series, but its quality more than makes up for it. Speaking of her affection, her relationship with her Yuma is, in my opinion, far more compelling than the series' main couple. They have a natural opposites attract dynamic, clearly thriving on helping and showing affection to each other despite their harsh world and the story's dramatic elements. This leads to some of the cutest romance scenes, with Ai in particular taking remarkable actions to show she's, at least in my opinion, an ideal girlfriend. For people like me who like Deredere types a lot, Ai is the first female character in a long time that made me think, why aren't I going out with a girl like this? On top of all this, Ai has mildly quirky, unique interests and ways of thinking, and she's childhood friends with her love interest, which makes me love her even more since these are just a lot of traits I really like in heroines all put in one. The only flaws I can think about her is that I'm generally not into extremely petite lolly designs, and even in Irohika, where Ai gets more screen time, she remains somewhat of a plot device in the main story. However, the impact she makes in her route and the true route, and her bright, memorable, genuinely loving personality with surprising depth easily makes Ai my favorite Deredere character in any visual novel. And that wraps up my thoughts for my top 10 Deredere heroines and visual novels. I know this isn't usually an overly talked about archetype, but it's one that I've always liked even when I was a mere young anime fan, and I'm glad to see that while the archetype is still relatively rare in the VN scene, the ones that do exist have made a strong impact, with many just being ones that I've recently experienced for the first time. Anyways, what are some of your favorite Deredere visual novel heroines, or do you even like the archetype in general? Feel free to leave a comment below.